Good evening, fellow climate realists. This is such a great event, and I'm sure we're all grateful to the Heartland Institute for bringing us all together once again. I was at the first of these meetings, and it was a memorable experience because I think I, like so many others who came, felt that we were toiling in obscure vineyards all by ourselves with maybe a few allies scattered hither and yon. We had no idea that there was at least a latent movement just waiting to be activated. And if it weren't for the Heartland Institute, it would never have taken off the way it has. And I think every time we come to one of these conferences, we go forth from it with renewed determination, vigor, courage, and good spirits. It's wonderful to be with so many friends that are also colleagues. And that brings me to the topic of my talk, which I shall try to be as concise as possible about. But I now want to invite all of you to express your appreciation to one of my good friends, and I'm sure a friend to many of you, and certainly a colleague and mentor to many, many more of you, and that is Patrick J. Michaels, Dr. Patrick J. Michaels. And I believe that I first met Pat at a dinner that was arranged by our mutual friend R.J. Smith, who is here tonight, of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And I think it was in 1997. At least that was the year when I jumped into this issue, having no background in it prior to that. But it was the Kyoto year, and it was clear to me that the agenda had something to do with imposing energy rationing on the United States and as many other countries as possible, and that would limit our prosperity and our freedom, and that also, in order to pull it off, the governments of the world would have to collude and conspire. And so even though there wasn't a terminology quite yet that was commonplace, I knew that it had something to do with global governance and the loss of sovereignty in the old-fashioned constitutional sense of self-government, in which the government is accountable to the citizens at the ballot box. And of course, once decisions are, the big decisions about public policy are made by global elites, there is no way for the voter in a free society to hold anyone accountable or fire them at the ballot box. So I knew this was a big deal, but I didn't know a whole bunch about it, and RJ told me that he was a friend of Dr. Patrick Michaels and that Pat Michaels was a leading expert and that I should meet him. And so I did, and I can't remember anything about that dinner except that I enjoyed myself thoroughly. And then it was either that year or the next year, it was 1998, that both Pat and I testified at a House Small Business Committee hearing, and I was very nervous, not so much about testifying, but about testifying next to Pat, because he was a real scientist, and I'm not a scientist, and I decided that maybe because my background was in political philosophy. It's interesting, my colleague Myron Ebel is here and spoke today, and Myron's background is in philosophy, and somehow we both ended up in this particular battle and dedicating most of our professional lives to it. But anyway, there was this argument out there that the Kyoto Protocol was an insurance policy, and I knew that was bogus, and you didn't need to be a scientist to prove that was bogus, but it was clear that the Kyoto Protocol and all these policies like that were all premium for no benefit, and that if any insurance salesman tried to peddle a policy like that in the commercial marketplace, they'd be prosecuted for fraud and go to jail. So anyway, I made this case, and after that hearing, Pat shook my hand and said, "Congratulations, you're now batting in the major leagues." And I'll tell you something, that just made me feel 10 feet tall And I think it was one of the moments of inspiration that helped me decide, yes, I should continue doing this. And ever since then, Pat was more than generous with his time in mentoring me. I'm sure many of you have had the same experience, but I used to contact him and his then sidekick, Chip Knappenberger, all the time for clarification about issues, to check my data, to vet my drafts, to make sure that my writing was clear, and to ask, is there a better way to say this? Because you've given a lot more thought to this than I. And a few years later, when Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth came out, I had actually learned enough from Pat and from some other people in this room, like Roy Spencer and Dick Lindzen and John Christie, who's not here, to actually write a book-length commentary on An Inconvenient Truth, where I went through every substantive line and found that everything Al Gore said was either wrong, a half-truth, misleading, exaggerated, or speculation, unsupported by data. And Pat and Chip reviewed it all, as did John Christie, by the way, so that I didn't make any embarrassing mistakes, thanks to them. And so Pat Michaels, I want to say I believe Pat is one of a handful of true thought leaders, and there are several of you in this room, and I'm not going to name you, because then if I leave someone out, someone's feelings may be hurt, but I think you all know how I feel about you. And and not only was he a thought leader who had to summon up more than the usual amount of courage, and even for brave people, but certainly by the standards of this town, in order to make this case, also did so with a great deal of humor. And the humor is itself an aspect of Pat's courage. Pat laughs at overwhelming odds, and I think that's a great example to all of us. And I think you can get a sense of how he has helped to lead our movement in a humorous way just by the title of his books. The first book was called Sound and Fury. It was published in 1992. Does everyone know why that's a significant year? That's the year of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Sound and Fury. And where does that phrase come from? It comes from Shakespeare. It's after Macbeth murders his kinsman. Life sucks. And Macbeth says, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now, Pat left off signifying nothing, but, I think that gives a pretty clear and humorous perspective on the climate movement as it was emerging as a world force in 1992. His next book was called The Satanic Gases. It came out in the year 2000. We all remember what that is an allusion to, right? Salman Rushdie's book, The Satanic Verses. So I don't think you have to stretch too far to infer that Pat sees something intolerant about this climate movement as it had developed by the time that good old George Bush was about ready to take the reins after beating Al Gore in Florida. And he had a book in 2009 called Climate of Extremes, and you can bet your bottom dollar it's not about extreme weather, it's about climate extremism about the weather. And then his latest book is Lukewarming, and it's called The New Climate Science That Changes Everything. And I'll bet that many of you have had the experience that Moliere's character Tartuffe had in Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, which was one day he found out, much to his delight, that all his life he had been speaking prose. Okay, and I think that many of us found out to our delight that all this time we had been lukewarmers, but we didn't have a term for it. Now, as far as I know, Pat was the first to use this term, and others have proclaimed themselves as lukewarmers, but when he presented, I think he presented this viewpoint to me before he used the term, and it always seemed to me correct. And so I'm not trying to put anyone else here down, but the idea that we have to start with the recognition that greenhouse gases have a greenhouse effect, which means a warming effect, and that the real issue is how dangerous climate change is, or anthropogenic climate change, and especially how dangerous it is compared to the dangers of the climate agenda, rather than trying to make the case that it just is simply a hoax. Anyway, he persuaded me really effortlessly that that was both correct and also politically prudent. Now there's one book, though, that I left out. It's called Meltdown: The Predictable Distortion of Global Warming by Scientists, Politicians, and the Media. And this is the book, I think, where Pat finally fleshes out the details of something he'd been thinking about for some time, which is how government funding has corrupted climate science as a social phenomenon. And he starts the analysis of the book with Eisenhower's farewell address. Now, many of us remember what Eisenhower said. He warned against a military-industrial complex. But most people have forgotten the other part of his farewell address. He refers to a related danger, which is that government funding has become so pervasive and so important in the life of our research institutions that there is a real danger public policy may become captive to a government-funded scientific technological elite. And I think, so Pat doesn't use this term in the book, but he was spot on in 2004 that we had seen it emerge in our lifetimes a climate industrial complex. And to update this, just only a few months ago, 58 self-proclaimed national security and defense leaders wrote a letter to President Trump urging him not to let Will Happer convene a commission to review critically the U.S. national assessment on climate change. And so what you can see there is the merging of the climate industrial complex with the military industrial complex, because there's nothing quite like climate change to give the defense establishment a pretext to mission creep themselves into budgets, new budgets and new programs forever without ever having to risk getting shot at on the battlefield. The only risk they have to take is maybe they'll eat too much at some international climate conference. Okay, now I bring this up because one of the most, I think, impressive demonstrations of Pat's courage is the way he has tackled the U.S. National Climate Assessment from the very beginning. The very first report, 2000, he proved that it was based on two models that could not replicate U.S. temperature history over the 20th century, whether you took it on 5-year increments, 10-year increments, 15-year increments, I believe also 25 increments, better than a table of random numbers. It actually performed worse than just running red noise through the computers. And he presented this to Tom Carl, about whom we heard today from Pat, and Carl agreed that these climate models were not predictive in any way, in fact that they did worse than just flipping coins, but decided that they would go ahead and base the U.S. national assessment on that anyway. Okay, I see that it's getting to be my time to wrap up. I was going to read what Pat said about it. He just said about the assessment that it's about as explanatory as Sigmund Freud, and then later on the second, or actually earlier on the, excuse me, I was talking about the third assessment there when he talked about Sigmund Freud, but on the second assessment, he said, of all the consensus government intergovernmental documents of this genre that I have reviewed in my 30 years in this profession, there is no doubt that this is absolutely the worst of all. Virtually every sentence can be contested or does not represent a complete survey of a relevant literature. This is one climate scientist talking straight to the members of his profession who run 13 agencies funded at billions of dollars. That takes real spine. That takes real courage. And so I just want to once again invite all of you to celebrate with me the courage and humor of our good friend and mentor, Patrick Michaels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Heartland Institute for this award. I will say one thing: it hasn't been easy, and it has cost. But so, we have work to do, and I intend to go forward with that work to show you what our objective is. This should be going forward. Say what? Ready to roll? Well, I can tell you a story. Marlo saved me a lot of time in my talk because he read from many of the quotes that are in the talk, so I'll be able to gloss over them and we'll be able to get out a little earlier than we were going to, so thank you so much, Marlo. I think you hit the highlight reel. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about, and then we'll catch up with it, because time's wasted. The object of the game is the endangerment finding from carbon dioxide, published by the EPA on December 7th of 2009. It suffers from 4 major problems that I believe are sufficient to defeat it. And if we can get the slide up, may I ask AV what the issue is? Okay, cool. One of the problems, of course, is the disconnect between the models and reality. The other problem is that the assessment is based, its future projections, only upon models. It has nothing to do with the past. It has to do simply with those models. And the assessment itself is based upon a technical support document whose primary reference is, in fact, Marlo, the second National Assessment on Climate Change. It's cited more times than any other document in the technical support document for the endangerment finding. And as a result, there we go, that would be me. Well, it's on the screen here. Yay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Science and the endangerment finding, that would be me. That says Competitive Enterprise Institute. I think that's going to happen next week in the Carbon Dioxide Coalition. And I'm just happy to be here at this meeting. It's a wonderful venue. Heartland, you've done a hell of a job. I have to say that. All right. So the endangerment finding, in fact, suffers from 4 critical flaws. Critical differences between model projections and observations, necessarily biased canon of climate science, and that's something a lot of people don't really realize, is the assessments of science that are made might not be very trustworthy, and I think I can show you why very, very quickly. Flaw number 1 results from the unjustified tuning of the climate models to the 20th century climate history, and the assessments themselves range from scientific malpractice to naked politics. Now, to say scientific malpractice, them's fighting words. But Marlo pointed it out. Here is the critical difference between models, projections, and observations. We'll start off with that. Many of you have seen these charts. Showed them earlier. This, of course, is the difference. This is Spencer Christie's congressional testimony, where you have the average of the 102 models and 32 groupings, and you have the upper air data and the weather balloon data and the reanalysis data. Reanalysis is this new fangled thing where we fill in the blanks of missing data with an actual real model, as opposed to doing what was done to the temperature records, which was to put in fake data where there wasn't any. This is it in the vertical. You see here, these are the observed temperatures here as we go up in the atmosphere from the surface to about 40,000 feet. And these are the projected temperature changes in degrees Celsius per decade. You can see they're all too hot, except for one of them. And those of you who took in my earlier talk know that is the Russian model. And again, I think we need to call this to the attention of the special counsel. This is the latest iteration of this. This is published by Christie and McKittrick very recently, and it is the slice of the atmosphere where the warming up in the atmosphere is supposed to be the greatest. And it's the difference between what is projected by those computer models and what's observed. And again, the green line there, or the black line there, is the Russian model, INMCM4. So it gets the tropical hotspot. And as I did mention earlier, there's a newer version of it, INMCM5, and it simulates the pause in warming that occurred in the early 21st century. Now, here's a real knotty problem. Is the canon of climate science necessarily biased? And so then when we have assessments, such as the U.S. National Assessment, again, the second one serves as the primary basis for the endangerment finding, is the science that's going into those assessments, are those assessments reliable? Well, here's a person that, we'll discuss this. There's a problem with publication bias. Publication bias, I'm going to give you the raw version of publication bias. Don't waste your time reading Dubbin's definition of it. It's correct. Publication bias is, well, I applied for a grant to show X, and I found Y, so it goes in the drawer, and I don't send it out for publication, because if I do, I'm probably going to not get renewed. And as a matter of fact, Randy Schekman won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, and using the right conjunction there, it is Physiology or Medicine, in 2013, wrote an op-ed in that bastion of conservatism, the London Guardian, the day he received his award. And the title of it was How Journals Like Nature, Cell, and Science Are Damaging Science. And in it, what he said was that these high-impact journals publish things that will get them television time and news time preferentially. And because scientists are rewarded differentially for publishing in Nature and Science, and in his field, in Cell, that means that they will gravitate towards whatever will get high attention. And in this case, there is no issue that has taken over the pages of Nature magazine more, and Science magazine more, than climate change. Nature got so many climate change manuscripts that said so many awful things that they started a brand new flavor of the journal Nature called Nature Climate Change. And in it, you'll see 30 articles every issue. But here is the person that, most important person you probably have never heard of. His name is Daniele Finelli, and he is at Stanford working with a person that you probably have heard of, John Ioannidis, who published that famous paper, Why Most Research Results Are Wrong, or why 95% of all research results are wrong. And what Finelli found, studying 17 years of data around the world in 10 different disciplines, was that the amount of percentage of positive results being reported is going up and up and up. That's impossible, ladies and gentlemen. In a real world, that's impossible. Consider how this process works. You can't do research at a major university that's going to be worth very much unless you have public money or a lot of private money. It's almost always public money in climate science. It is only public money. Industry abdicated its responsibility about 10 or 15 years ago, and I guess they wanted to still sell gasoline. But so you have a funded hypothesis, and you ask the question in the paper, does the data support my funded hypothesis? By God, the answer is yes here, more yes here, and yes, yes, yes over here. This is impossible in a real world. So that's prima facie evidence that when science is summarized in a document like the IPCC reports or the U.S. National Assessment, which base the endangerment finding, that those documents, those summary documents, if they report accurately, will report a biased canon of knowledge. and they will report it accurately, and governments will use that and say, aha, our U.S. Global Change Research Program proved that this is a real problem, therefore we have an endangerment finding. The assessments themselves, I said, range from scientific malpractice to naked politics. I'll just give you a few examples. Marlowe alluded to the first one. It was a willful violation of normative science. Those are fighting words. I don't say that lightly because I know it was. I took a look at, there were 2 climate models that were used in the first assessment. They had a choice of 14. The 2 that they chose, one of them, the Canadian model, predicted more warming in the 21st century than any other model. The other one they used, the UKMO model, predicted more changes in precipitation than any of the other 14 models. Mike McCracken was the head of the U.S. Global Change Research Program at that point in time. And I said, Mike, why did you do that? And he said, well, we wanted to see what the worst case scenarios were. Nowhere in the first national assessment does it say anything like that, and he was not telling me the truth. They wanted to paint a picture. And so I asked, how do these models simulate 10-year running means of U.S. temperature over the 20th century? Remember, the first assessment came out in the year 2000. By the way, in the year 2000, when the election was in doubt, it came out after the election and before the Supreme Court decision. I asked it, can you simulate 2001 to 2010, 2002 to 2011, et cetera, on up to the year 1995 at that point in time. Now, what a model is supposed to do is it's supposed to take noisy data that looks like this and reduce the noise in that data. A model explains variance in technical terms, or if you want to use the square root of the variance, it explains the standard deviation of the data as a certain percent. And Carl, I sent Carl, who's the head scientist for the report, I said, Tom, you guys are worse than a table of random numbers. And I thought, he's not going to write back to you. He did. He emailed me back and he said, the problem is you just looked at 10-year running means. We looked at 1, 5, 10, 15, and 25. And in each and every case, the model added noise to the data. It didn't explain the data. To give you an example, I'm going to bludgeon you with this because it is so malpractice. It would be like having a 4-choice, multiple choice exam and getting less than 25%. Now, my colleague Bob Davis at the University of Virginia claims that he had a few football players that actually achieved this. But here you can see, this is the variance of standard deviation of the raw model at 1 year, 5 years, in red, 20 years, 25 years, and the blue is after the model's been run. It added noise to the data. And what did they do? They continued to publish the report. It went forward. I'm sorry, this is like prescribing Ritalin for high blood pressure. It's about like that. The second national assessment, 2009, served as a prime citation for the endangerment finding. And Marlowe read this quote, so I'm not going to read it back to you. It was a horrible document. I had never seen anything. Chip is a weeb. Chip Knappenberger and I wrote the review. Virtually every sentence can be contested or does not represent a complete sample survey of a relevant literature. Ed Crane was the president of Cato at the time. I said, Ed, I showed it to Ed. He said, can you prove that? I said, tell you what, Ed, why don't I make a document that looks just like the national assessment and cover the exact same topic areas in the exact same order and show what's missing? He said, that would be a great idea. Now go raise the money to do it. And we had a fundraiser, and 45 minutes into the fundraiser, I had enough money to run the project. And this is what we did. This is the U.S. document, Global Climate Change Impacts in the United States. Wait a minute, what's this down here? That's not United States temperature. That's UN global temperature record. I thought this was supposed to be global climate change impacts in the United States. Oh, and by the way, this is supposed to be climate change. One of the key components of climate change are these things. They're called clouds. So we put clouds on our cover, and we put the actual US temperature for the 20 years prior to this assessment. And you can see that it looks quite a bit different. They have their key findings, we have ours. Let me just read the key finding about human health and risks to human health will increase. It's key finding number 7. Harmful health impacts of climate change are related to increasing heat stress, waterborne diseases, poor air quality, extreme weather events, and diseases transmitted by insects and rodents. This is in the United States, folks. Reduced cold stress could provide some benefits. Yeah, right. Robust public health infrastructure can reduce the potential for negative impacts. And they refer to page 89 in their report. Here we have number 7. Life expectancy and wealth are likely to continue to increase. There's little relationship between life expectancy, wealth, and climate. Even under the most dire scenarios, people will be much wealthier and healthier than they are today than in the year 2100. And pages 141 to 147 and 160 to 162. And so the reports really were, my report really was what's called a palmistrat of the US GCRP report. Here's their section on national climate change. Here's my section on national climate change. They were formatted exactly the same, and the flow was exactly the same. We had more scientific references in our report than they had in theirs. And that the reason for that is 2 fields related to climate change have not been infected with the publication bias. It happens to be ecosystem science and agriculture. And that's largely due to the fact that 2 major figures in the field, Paul Wagner was one of them and Sylvan Whitwer was the other. Wagner just died. They ran the field, and they didn't buy it. They thought, no, CO2 makes things grow better, it's obvious, and my graduate students, and there are going to be many of them, and they're going to run these fields. That's how that happened. I'll just say one word about third national assessment. When it came out, NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, issued a press release. It said, quote, the third national assessment is a, quote, a key deliverable of President Obama's climate action plan. That's objective science if I ever saw it. What's really happening on the planet has been talked about today a great deal. It's getting greener. Lord Monckton mentioned this. This is from Zhu et al. In 2016. I'd just like to point out the details on this, just so you can appreciate the magnificent things that are happening on God's getting greener earth. This is a graph of something called leaf area index. It's a measure of the density of leaf cover on a plant, or leaf cover over the ground. Where it would be, the change would be negative, the leaf cover would be decreasing. Where it would be positive, it would be increasing. The units, for what it's worth, are 10 to the minus 2 meters squared per meter squared per year. For what that's worth, solve that Rebus puzzle in your head if you're bored. But I want to point out, see these pink colors here, that usually means bad. Now, not the way this graph is set up. That's massive 25-fold, or 25 times the background leaf area index in the tropical rainforest of South America, Africa, East Asia, and the Western Pacific Islands. The places where everybody's concerned about deforestation and the loss of the lungs of the world, as they were called. They're growing. They're becoming more saturated with vegetation and growing and growing and growing. I used to love the phrase when Carol Browner was the EPA administrator under Clinton. I got on Crossfire once, and she was going on there, and I said, you know, the world's getting greener, not browner. Zhu et al. Did a factor analysis as to what's causing the greening. I just thought I'd like to point out 70% of it is direct from CO2, 9% from nitrogen deposition, that's fertilizer, 8% from climate change, longer growing seasons, more green. Land cover change, if you want to see land cover change, just go about 50 miles south of here into Virginia, and you will see that the deforested land in Jefferson's time is now pretty much a jungle. And by the way, the comment earlier on Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia, when he talked about how the snow used to hang around much longer than it is now, used to lay on the ground 3 months a year, etc. The rest of that section was missed. He attributed that climate change to human activity. He said, no doubt this will continue as the deforestation of Virginia continues. So yeah, he was quite a guy. This is one of my favorite. This is, again, leaf area index trends. This is from Mounier et al. Last year. He divides the world into 6 separate vegetation types. 3 of them are agricultural: summer crops, winter crops, and grassland. And the most common of all of them is grassland. That's what we grow cows on. So the volume of grassland is directly related to the volume of cows, which is directly related to the volume of high-quality protein that people consume. And you can't see the numbers from there, but on the lower left, on the lower graph, grasslands, it says leaf area index mean 0.55, trend 0.0279 per year. That's 5% of the mean per year. It's growing. In the 17 years of this study, that means the grassland biomass grew 85%. Didn't hear that on the BBC, did you? No, don't know why. So flaw number 1, the problem that the models don't work, results from the unrealistic tuning of the climate models on the 20th century history. I went through that earlier today. The models are tuned on the 20th century to simulate this warming here as well as this warming here. When this warming started, the CO2 concentration had only gone up 18 parts per million. If that caused that half a degree warming that you see there between then and 1945, again, it would be so hot we wouldn't be having this meeting. And here's what happens when you do that to models. Indeed, whether climate scientists like to admit it or not, nearly every model has been calibrated precisely to the 20th century climate records, otherwise it would have ended up in the trash. Next paragraph. For years, climate scientists have been mum and public about their, quote, secret sauce. What happened in the models stayed in the models. That taboo reflected fears that climate contrarians would use the practice of tuning to seed doubt about the models. That's one accurate prediction that was made. And this is the article from Science in 2016. I went through this earlier today. I won't bore you with it again. It is physically impossible. There's not enough change in the carbon dioxide forcing in 1910 to have caused all that warming. The unintended consequences of tuning is to make the models wrong. And finally, Hordan et al. In the Art and Science of Climate Model Tuning talks about the increasing diversity in the applications of climate models. There are a variety of goals for specific problems, and different models may be optimized to perform better on a particular metric. I love this, related to specific goals, expertise, or cultural identity of a given modeling group. My God, identity politics enters climate modeling. Thus do social science and physical sciences go hand in hand. One can imagine keeping a parameter which is known to affect the sensitivity, changing a parameter, keeping both this parameter and the equilibrium climate sensitivity in the anticipated acceptable range. What's the anticipated acceptable range? Who on earth decides that? You have this objective code in the model. It calculates a change in temperature, which you translate into a sensitivity. No. You decide what the code is, and you decide what the answer is, and you just use the model as a doll, a plaything, to make it look real, but you decide what it is. Translation, it's the scientist, not the science, that determines what's anticipated and acceptable. Now, do you seriously believe that if you have your hand on the control knob, and if you decided that the anticipated acceptable range was 1.5 degrees C of warming over the course of the next century, as the Russian model, INMCM4, says, do you think you're going to get renewed? Buddy, you're going back to coach. And that is the prime target of avoidance for all climate scientists. Inescapable conclusion, EPA's endangerment finding is fatally flawed and should be vacated. And we want to take this forward, Marlo, Myron, everyone here. We need to take this forward. Nobody is going to respond unless there's pressure. It's easy to say, oh, it's too much of a lift. Well, I've been lifting this for a long time. We got help here. Let's do it, and let's do it now. Thank you.